The world is full of geographical surprises that defy logic. How can a landlocked country have an active navy? Or can an American state be the easternmost and westernmost at the same time? These are real facts that almost no one knows. Geography is not just about maps and capitals. It hides paradoxes and incredible statistics that make any conversation more interesting. If you enjoy discovering information that few people know, get ready. What comes next will change the way you see the world. If someone told you that a landlocked country had a large and active navy, would you believe them? Well, Bolivia, despite being confined to the continent, maintains a naval fleet with around 173 military vessels. This is because, although it lost access to the Pacific Ocean in the War of the Pacific against Chile, the country has never stopped claiming its right to the sea. Its navy operates on lakes and rivers, mainly on the gigantic Lake Titicaca, where soldiers train as if they were in ocean waters. Interestingly, Bolivia still maintains an official date called Day of the Sea, reaffirming its historical struggle. But why would a country invest so much in a naval force without a sea coast? The answer goes beyond patriotic symbolism. Bolivia's rivers and lakes are strategic transport and trade routes, in addition to representing a matter of national security. Having a functional navy allows the country to patrol its waters, combat crimes such as smuggling and drug trafficking, and even participate in international operations. Imagine, for example, the importance of Lake Titicaca, which in addition to being the highest navigable lake in the world, borders Peru and directly influences the region's economy. The most interesting thing is that this situation is not unique in the world. Countries like Paraguay and Mongolia, also landlocked, maintain naval forces operating on rivers and lakes. But Bolivia stands out for the number of vessels and the intensity with which it maintains its maritime claim. This geographical peculiarity shows us how a nation's identity can be rooted in its history, even when geography seems to impose barriers. And speaking of geographical paradoxes, have you ever imagined a country so large that, even if divided in half, it would still be the largest? Russia is a true territorial colossus, spanning 2 continents and 11 time zones. Now, here's a geographical curiosity that defies logic. Even if Russia were cut in half, both halves would still be the largest countries on their respective continents. This means that if the European portion of Russia were an independent country, it would still be larger than France, the largest nation in Europe, excluding Russia itself. The Asian part, on the other hand, would remain gigantic, maintaining its status as the largest territory in Asia, even without the western part. In other words, Russia is so large that it could lose half of itself and still remain unbeatable. This phenomenon is due to the territorial dominance inherited from the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union, which annexed vast areas over the centuries. Cities like Ekaterinburg and Novosibirsk, for example, are thousands of kilometers from the capital Moscow, but they remain essential to the functioning of the country. To get an idea of the gigantic size of Russia, just compare. Siberia alone is larger than the whole of Canada, which is the second largest country in the world. This immensity brings unique logistical challenges, such as the need for gigantic railways, such as the legendary Trans-Siberian Railway, which crosses the country from one end to the other. The curious thing is that, despite all this grandeur, Russia has vast areas that are practically uninhabited, especially in Siberia. There are villages where the population density is lower than in Greenland. And this leads us to an interesting reflection. Does territorial size translate into quality of life? Well, there is a small Asian country that decided to focus on happiness instead of size or economy. But did it work? Bhutan is a country that defies conventional metrics of success. While most nations measure their progress by GDP, Bhutan has embraced the concept of gross national happiness, GNH, prioritizing the well-being of its citizens over economic growth. Sounds like heaven on earth, right? But here's the twist. Despite this unique philosophy, Bhutan ranks only 95th in the world's happiness rankings. How can a country that prides itself on measuring the happiness of its people be so far down the list? This seeming contradiction highlights how external factors, such as access to services, opportunities, and infrastructure, still profoundly impact quality of life. While the idea of GNH is inspiring, the reality of Bhutan is not without its challenges. Nestled between the mighty Himalayan mountain ranges, the country has a fragile economy and is heavily dependent on India for energy and trade. In addition, the population faces challenges such as a lack of formal employment and a limited healthcare system. For many Bhutanese, happiness may be a philosophy of life, but the practicalities of everyday life pose obstacles that are hard to ignore. Yet Bhutan is a rare example of a government that seeks to balance development and emotional well-being, something that many Western countries fail to consider. This discrepancy between ideal and reality leads us to a broader reflection. Can happiness be measured solely by state policies? Or do cultural and social factors play an even greater role? It is interesting to note that even great economic powers do not guarantee complete happiness for their population. And speaking of surprising powers, did you know that there is a religious minority in one of the most rigid countries in the world that, alone, exceeds the population of all of Australia? When one thinks of China, the first image that comes to mind usually involves technology, a gigantic economy, and an ancient culture. But a surprising fact challenges this perception. The Christian population in China, although representing only 2% of the total, already exceeds 27 million people. This means that there are more Christians in China than there are inhabitants in entire countries, such as Australia. And this number could be even higher, considering the existence of underground religious communities that operate outside the control of the state. In other words, while many see China as a predominantly atheist or Buddhist country, the reality is much more complex. The history of Christianity in China is full of twists and turns. Despite the restrictions imposed by the government, the growth of this religion has been constant, especially among Protestant communities. House churches spread throughout the country, often operating in secret to avoid state repression. At the same time, churches officially registered by the government follow strict rules and have their speeches monitored. This scenario creates an interesting paradox. While the state tries to limit religious influence, Christianity continues to grow quietly, driven by the faith and resilience of its followers. This phenomenon also raises a fascinating question. What really drives the growth of an ideology or belief? The power of an idea is not measured only by the space it occupies in society, but by its ability to cross barriers and remain alive. And speaking of challenges of gigantic proportions, imagine a single American state having a GDP greater than that of entire countries. Does that seem exaggerated? Well, that is the reality of Indiana, whose economy surprises even large nations. If someone told you that the state of Indiana in the United States has an economy larger than entire countries, would you believe it? Well, with a GDP of approximately $500 billion, Indiana surpasses nations such as the Philippines, Vietnam, and Bangladesh. This means that a single U.S. state generates more wealth than populous and economically relevant countries on the global stage. Indiana's economy is diversified, with emphasis on the automotive industry, agricultural production, and technology. Companies such as Eli Lilly, a pharmaceutical giant, and automakers such as Honda and Subaru are part of this powerful economic engine. But how does a state that is not among the most famous in the U.S. achieve this feat? The answer lies in the combination of tax incentives, robust infrastructure, and a strategic location, which facilitates the transport of goods across the country. Indiana is one of the main logistics centers in the United States, with a network of highways and railways that connect several regions. In addition, the state invests heavily in innovation and technological development, attracting more and more companies from cutting-edge sectors, such as artificial intelligence and biotechnology. This example shows us that population size does not always determine the economic power of a region. Indiana has just over 6 million inhabitants, far fewer than the countries it surpasses economically. This raises an interesting question. Is the secret to success solely in the resources available, or in the way they are used? And speaking of concepts that defy logic, did you know that the same American state can be, at the same time, the most eastern and the most western in the country? Alaska is already known for its stunning landscapes, extreme climate, and strategic position between America and Asia. But there is a geographical curiosity that few realize. It is the westernmost and easternmost state in the United States. Does it seem contradictory? That's because the 180th meridian, which divides the planet into the eastern and western hemispheres, passes through some of the islands of Alaska, specifically the Aleutian Islands. This means that part of the state's territory technically extends to the eastern side of the globe, although it is west of the rest of the country. This geographical detail creates some curious situations. For example, depending on your exact location in Alaska, you may be one day ahead or behind other parts of the state due to the international dateline. In addition, Alaska not only shares a land border with Canada, but is also just 82 kilometers from Russia at the narrowest point of the Bering Strait. This means that, on a clear day, it is possible to see land on the other side. This position makes Alaska a strategic point both historically, as in World War II, and economically, being a center for fishing and oil exploration. And speaking of impressive numbers, Alaska also has the lowest population density in the U.S., with vast areas of land virtually uninhabited. But you'd be wrong if you thought it held the title of having the most of anything per capita. That title goes to a small European country where there are more registered cars than people. Have you ever imagined a place where, statistically, every inhabitant has more than one car? San Marino, one of the world's smallest and oldest republics, holds an interesting record. It has the highest car per capita ratio on the planet. With a population of approximately 34,000, the country has an average of 1.6 vehicles per person. In other words, there are more registered cars than residents. This may seem like an exaggeration, but it makes sense when you consider the local lifestyle. San Marino, despite its small size, has mountainous terrain, which makes public transport less practical. In addition, the cost of maintaining a car in the country is relatively low, encouraging residents to own more than one vehicle. Another factor contributing to this phenomenon is the country's tax policy. San Marino has more lenient taxes than many neighboring countries, making car ownership more affordable. This attracts not only local citizens, but also foreigners who register their cars there to take advantage of the tax benefits. As a result, the small territory has become a true automotive paradise, with an impressive fleet for its size. It's common to see luxury cars driving around the streets, as San Marino is also home to collectors and car enthusiasts. This curious fact makes us reflect on how certain geographic and political characteristics can create unexpected scenarios. Who would have imagined that a microstate nestled in Italy would have more cars than people? But the world is full of peculiarities like this, and many of them go unnoticed. Now that we've explored these fascinating geographic curiosities, have you ever stopped to think about how many other surprising details there are around the globe? Now that you know these geographical curiosities, the question is, what else does the world hide that you don't know yet? Geography is full of surprising facts that defy common sense, and understanding these peculiarities is not just entertainment. It's a way of seeing the world in a more intelligent and curious way. After all, who doesn't like having that rare knowledge that impresses any conversation? But what about you? Which of these curiosities surprised you the most? Is there another one that you know that almost no one talks about? Leave your comment and share your knowledge. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue discovering incredible facts about our planet. Because, believe me, there's still a lot more to explore.